Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for your attendance today. We look forward to discussing round 2 of the MBA application process. Feels like we were just in the midst of round 1. We sort of still are with all the interview prep we're doing for round 1 applicants, but round 2 right around the corner, really just like 7, 8, maybe 9 weeks away, depending where you live and what holidays you might celebrate. There are going to be holidays squeezed in there. In the U.S. here, we got Thanksgiving and people have Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year's. So it could get pretty busy, and many others, of course, as well. But Thanksgiving being the U.S. specific one, I should mention. But in any event, the point is, it could get very busy this time of year, and you really want to be locked in if you're planning to apply in round 2. So let's talk about that a little bit today. Thank you again for your attendance. My name is Guglielmo. I'm the founder of Avanti Prep MBA Admissions Consulting. You can visit us at avantiprep.com. You'll see it up there on the screen. So let's talk about round 2. The goal today, by the way, we're going to do a little bit of a presentation, I guess. A lot of it borrowing from a presentation I gave. Can't believe it was 5 months ago, but it was back in June on GMAT Club for people who were deciding at that time between round 1 and round 2. What's kind of funny or ironic now is that some people out there, you all out there, might be deciding between round 1 and round 2. Only it would be, in your case, round 2 of this year and round 1 of next year. So we can tease that out a little bit. We'll talk about round 3. We'll talk about different deadlines. We have a little bit of an agenda up, so let me pull that. By the way, if you can't see this, I'm obviously not in presentation mode, rightly or wrongly. If you can't see it, just pop a comment in there, and we will try to switch over. I have a little bit of a pet peeve about presentation mode during these presentations. In full candor, it takes up the whole screen. You can't see how you're interacting with the camera. For those of you who I guess probably aren't doing interview prep, or maybe you are, you applied to a few schools in round 1. We talk a lot about your positioning with the camera, your eye contact. I try to adhere to those as best I can, especially in this virtual era that we've found ourselves in the last couple of years. And I don't know, sometimes the presentation mode, I think, can throw you off a little bit. But yeah, if you can't read anything, let me know. A little bit of an agenda here. We're going to revisit round decisions and implications, some important dates and deadlines to keep in mind. We'll walk through how to think about your round 2 MBA application strategy and plans. Little spoiler alert there. It's no different than round 1. I mean, how to approach your application, how to approach your you thinking about your essays, your resume, your recommenders, your school outreach. It doesn't matter when you apply. I guess the only thing that's going to matter here is you don't have that much time. If you're just kind of starting now, and that'll depend. That's candidate specific. Some of you might be joining and you've already made a lot of progress. So we'll talk a little bit about that. How do you manage the 8 or 9 weeks between now and your round 2 deadlines? What can you realistically hope to complete in this time frame and complete well? How do you approach your recommenders and engagement with schools of interest? Again, there's not a lot of time, and there's holidays mixed in, various ones. So that can be disruptive to people's schedules. That can mean, in the case of school outreach, you're trying to talk to students. Well, probably needs to happen in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And again, students in the US, they're going to have Thanksgiving. They're going to come back for maybe a few days of class. Then they're going to have finals. Then the semester's over. And students get a little difficult to reach. School research and engagement is super important. Often overlooked, super important. Getting to know the schools you're applying to, connecting with them, admissions events, virtual class visits, webinars, contact with current students. So making sure you're on top of that. Now we'll talk about that. And then we'll dedicate, I guess, about half the session to some open Q&A. I'll go through the questions in the comments. I don't know that we're going to be able to get to all of them, but let's see what's there, and we can address those and turn this into an open conversation. Again, because like how to approach your round two, the topic, that we have here today, it's a little bit broad. How do you approach your round two applications? Well, same way you always do, but there are some interesting things to think about within that. Just to tick through some of these slides and some of the presentation material that came out of or arose out of that June presentation I gave. Application dates and deadlines. Some of this is going to be 101 for some of you out there. I'm sure you know this like the back of your hand. Others, if you are just beginning to dip into the process, it might be relatively new. So let's hit on a few key points. Round one, it has passed. Round one deadlines typically fall from early September to mid-October. You're kind of winding around October 15th. That's the application deadlines. Interviews and such are all kind of happening en masse right now. And people will hear about their round one results, first, second, third week of December, like that. Round two typically falls from early January to mid-January with some tail thereafter. The important observation here, and for those of you who are about to engage with round two, look at the spread in round one. It usually goes from like September 3rd to October 15th. You've got about 6 weeks of spread with the deadlines. In round two, there's much more of a concentration. Almost every school, if we pulled up, one of the deadline calendars at GMAT Club or any other website, you're going to see that almost all of the round two deadlines fall between, I think this year, January 4th and, 12th, 15th. At MIT Sloan's like a little bit of a couple weeks after that, 20 something. But the point is, it's concentrated. Round two deadlines are really concentrated. So the ability to apply to that extra school or extra two schools, it can be kind of limited if you're playing a rushed game. And so, again, to reinforce, this is just another reason why you should be treating right now, November 12th, as like I don't want to like make you panic. Deadlines are imminent. They're not imminent. But if you think you're going to apply to 6 schools and you're pretty early in the game on this, you could just do the math. I mean, that averages out. You get 8 weeks to do 6 schools. You're looking at just over a week per school. That's tough. So just keep that in mind. Look really closely at your deadlines, like down to the day, down to the week, map things out, because odds are, if you're trying to apply to multiple schools, you're going to have like 2 deadlines on the 5th, maybe of January, maybe like a deadline on the 6th, maybe a deadline on the 10th. Michigan Ross, I believe, is Monday the 10th this year. That matters. Those extra couple of days, I'm not suggesting that you take things down to the wire, but I'm assuming if you're joining this call to talk about round two strategy, you're just strategizing on things now for deadlines that are 8 weeks away, you probably will be taking things down to that micro of a level. And I see some questions already in the chat box about when should I take the GMAT. The answer to that was 2 or 3 months ago. If you want to, but I mean that a little bit tongue in cheek. I don't want to like make things sound overly daunting, but we do need to talk about that, because if you're juggling, if you think you're taking the GMAT now and you want to maximize your score and you haven't started applications, there's probably a real conversation to be had as to whether you should even be applying this year. Some people, yeah, it'll work out. You'll take the GMAT once and you'll get the score you need or the score you want, and then you'll be able to kind of drive through these applications and get a couple out, good ones out, 2, 3, 4 apps maybe. But if you take the GMAT and your score isn't what you hope it would be, or you're just starting that process now, that's going to be tough. You'd probably be in the situation where you need to juggle in parallel a full effort on the GMAT and a full effort on your applications, and there's a lot to manage there. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, I was bringing up the micro nature of looking at your deadlines. The micro nature of looking at your deadlines. If you have like a Jan 10, like a Michigan Ross deadline, and your other deadlines are more like 3, 4, 5, you shouldn't wait, obviously, to do your Michigan Ross application until after Jan 3, 4, 5 pass. But you might have a few days. You can kind of manage out and visualize your calendar to say to yourself, okay, I am going to have a 3 or 4 day window before whatever that next deadline is, so I can finalize things. I could go, complete some of the more basic application entries. You should not wait till then to obviously engage with your recommenders or do your essays or do your resume or do or reach out to the school, engage with the schools. That stuff all needs to happen in the weeks leading up. But there might be, if you visualize your calendar and your deadlines with a fine-tooth comb, you will probably be able to, you'll probably be able to buy yourself or visualize what days you have to get things over the finish line later on. I've got round 3 and 4 listed here in parentheses. I'm really not a big fan of them. I don't think anyone is. They're kind of there was a little bit of some extra juice behind those rounds in 2020 last year. By the way, those were for people who applied in the 2019 to 2020 application cycle, and then so they applied 2 cycles ago, and then COVID hit toward the end of that, and it made round 3 a little more inviting, a little more unpredictable. We saw some activity. Schools were making different waivers and reopening rounds and all sorts of different things. That was in 2020 for the people who applied 2019, 2020 to enroll actually to start their program in 2020. A typical round 3, some schools have round 4. They're really, really, really tough. That's where the data get. Round 1 and round 2, we talked about it in that June presentation. We could hit on it quickly here. Round 1 and round 2 both are both mainstream rounds. In fact, there are schools that have talked about their volume. I believe Michigan Ross, again to cite Michigan Ross, they've been quoted talking about round volume. It's something on the order of like 30 to 35% of applications in round 1. Let's say 30% in round 1, 60% in round 2, maybe 10% thereafter. But it really is a tail in round 3 or round 4. I think if you're at the point, by the way, a lot of you probably are joining from outside of the US. If you are an international student outside the US applying to US programs, there are a lot of international deadlines as well. Some schools will say if you need a visa, then you need to apply by round 2 or whatever the case may be. There are merit fellowship deadlines. Oftentimes they fall in January. For Columbia, it's January 5th. For Emory-Goizeta, it's coincident with their round 2 deadline, which is also in January. So international deadlines, visa considerations, merit fellowship deadlines, if you think you are kind of a positive outlier for a certain school, might be able to command not only an acceptance, but merit fellowship, some degree of money. Really round 2, I think is your cutoff. Like, I've heard people joke that the round 3 is the athletes and Olympians round. That's hyperbole. It's not totally true, but if you're entertaining round 3, there should be some sort of, you probably want to be a really, really, really unique applicant. That's why people say athletes at Olympians or astronauts at Olympians. I've heard as well, again, hyperbole. If you're an outlier at a certain school, really, by positive outlier, I mean like, you have a 750 GMAT and the school's average is a 670. Okay, yeah, you'll still get attention in round 3. But if you're kind of, in the mix, think I'm going to be competitive, I don't love round 3. I think then there should be a conversation around. And again, like pushing aside, you got to look at the merit fellowship deadlines. You got to look at the international deadlines. Check those out for your schools. If you're tempted by round 3, I think you should pause, have a conversation, and look probably at round 1 of next year, provided that lines up. There are going to be always exceptions to that, of course, but that would be my general advice. Look out for non-traditional round structures. You've got schools that have rolling deadlines. You have schools, the ones listed here all had, I guess, or have, an October, November deadline mixed in. Columbia, HEC, Paris have rolling deadlines, but don't let that roll go for too long. Columbia's rolling deadline continues, but their merit fellowship is January 5th. A lot of people kind of treat that. They get a huge flood of applications right around that time. Try to be early, as early as you can with those roles as well. We're going to talk a little bit about, so those timing of application submission, interviews, decisions, and deposits. I think that's a little bit more for people who applied in round. So it could be applicable if any of you out there did apply in round one. Let's just say it now. If you did apply in round one and you're waiting to hear from some schools, but you're also thinking of applying in round two, it's a little bit difficult. You have to really manage your timeline, your calendar, and your activities. The reason is, a lot of round one schools, you're not going to find out if you got in until mid-December. Well, if you waited till mid-December and things don't go the way you hoped in round one, that's not a lot of time at all. That's 2 or 3 weeks then until round two deadlines. So you really can't wait. You can't bet on round one results. I think you have to have a fair bit, even a good bit of mobilization on your round two apps. Even if you're an applicant, you applied in round one, you're waiting to hear it, you really can't wait. Like you're not going to be able to contact students at this school. If you wait until December 15th, you're not going to be able to get anybody between December 15th and January 5, 6, 7, unless you have a warm connection or a friend. So it's pretty rare instances. Obviously, of course, as an admission consulting firm, we get tons of inquiries at that time every year. People who wait until the last minute and are looking for that last minute help. And we're navigating, the last couple of weeks of the year, and there are holidays mixed in, and I think the only times that I see that as viable would be if you as an applicant already have the only time I see waiting until you hear round one decisions come in and then deciding to put forth a couple of fresh applications in round two that you haven't even really thought about until December 15th or 16th or 17th or whatever. The only time is if you feel like you had an extremely strong basis of application material and essay material from round one that you, as a very capable applicant, could transform readily into round two applications. And if you've already researched and engaged with the school, because that you can't wait on. There's not really going to be events to attend or webinars. It's all going to look rushed too in the eyes of the school. He or she or that applicant didn't make any overtures to us or engage in any capacity until December 17th, after they clearly, heard, I guess, unfortunate news in round one. So don't wait, please don't wait. It's really, really difficult. It's only in pretty rare instances where maybe we've had applicants reach out to us that late in December, who the only instances where I've seen it function okay, they've already done their school research. They already have a lot of round one apps done. And, therefore they have a lot of developed essay material. Their resume doesn't need much work. Then maybe you could expedite applications in the last 2 or 3 weeks. But otherwise, you want to make the most of all the time between now and then. Other things, I think we hit most of this already, or it's not applicable. Obviously, early action and early decision are not applicable now. But for those of you who are deciding, or maybe come out of this conversation, say, you know what, I should, rather than condensing this process into 7 or 8 weeks, I still haven't taken my GMAT, or I don't have the score I want. I could be a totally viable candidate next year as well from a work experience perspective, maybe even a stronger candidate. If you take a breath coming out of this and say, you know what, I think I'd rather launch what I'd call a proper and full application strategy for to submit your applications early or round one of next year. There might be a few of you who walk out of here with that. And keep in mind, some schools will and do have early action or early decision deadlines. Some are binding, some aren't. So not super applicable right now, only to those of you who might walk out of here saying, you know what, I think applying next year might be part of my plans. Or maybe some people, we talked to a lot of people in recent weeks who have walked away saying, you know what, I might try for like 2 schools this year that are a little dreamier, a little reachier. but most of my strategy I will plan to occur in 2021. Some of the bullets on here, again, a little bit old, like top programs are currently releasing their essays and opening their applications. That's from June and July. You could forget that. They have those essay questions have been out for a few months now. Round one versus round two, I think we kind of talked about this a little bit. And again, it's not a decision to make right now for a lot of people. I think if you're joining this call, you're probably focused on round two. But again, for those of you who are thinking ahead to possible round one applications next year, they're both very mainstream rounds. I was alluding to some of the data, app volume data before. I've seen data where twice, again, we'll use that Ross example. I'm not quoting the statistics exactly, but it was roughly 30% of applicants in round one, 60% in round two, 10% in round three or thereafter, kind of a tail on it. By the way, from a supply and demand perspective, the school knows that they're going to get roughly, it's not like get round two is twice as hard. The school knows and expects that they're going to get those differences in volume. The schools know and expect that they're going to get those differences in volume between rounds. And for the most part, therefore, acceptance rates are pretty much the same in round one and round two. I think if you really went micro on the data, you might find a tiny bit higher of an acceptance rate. I've seen 2 percentage points across the US top 20 as kind of a catch-all figure, 2 percentage points higher in round one. I do think that if you're from an overrepresented professional, personal, demographic, national group, or some combination thereof, that can be a little bit higher. But round one and round two are both absolutely mainstream rounds. You should feel empowered to apply in either of those rounds. It's really round three, and if there is a round four out there anywhere, there are a couple, where you start to say, okay, now I'm really probably doing myself a disservice here. But if you're on the fence and you haven't, again, it's these people, I get people in the comments who haven't taken the GMAT, just getting started with this process, or maybe think they can only get like one app in round two. Start to peak at round one of next year. There are benefits to that. I've listed some of them here. You show early and engaged interest. You can be the first you to the post, the first kind of applicant like you. Yes, we're all unique, but there are other applicants like all of us out there as well. There's no seats taken. Scholarships, it kind of, I guess, depends on the school. Some schools maintain similar scholarship availability round to round. But the overarching point is always, and you'll hear schools say it when you join their calls, apply when your application is strongest. And really, I would say choose round one versus round two based primarily on when your application will be strongest. That does apply here. Again, kind of ironically, and I know they feel really far away, and it's a whole year difference in when you'd enroll. But that applies here also in choosing between, like this presentation was originally designed for, we gave it 5 months ago. It was looking ahead to this round one and round two. But these tidbits and thoughts are still applicable for you as you decide between round two of this year and round one of next year. I know that feels really far away, but wrestle with that and be honest with yourself about that. Are you really going to put your best foot forward right now in round two? Or how many schools do you think you could reasonably do that for between now and Jan 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? Maybe it's one, maybe it's two. Maybe you start to think about some sort of okay, I'll chase those. But if you're also by the same token, if you really love the school and it is your dream school, you don't want to. Schools are very welcoming of reapplicants, but what you put forth that first year, they don't unsee that if you reapply. So, I wouldn't toss a rushed application. Some school you really want to go to. Okay, I can only apply to 1 or 2 schools this year. Let me try for those reachy or dreamy schools. But I have to rush an app out and it's not going to look good at all. And then you say, okay, well, if I don't get in, I'll reapply. You can certainly reapply. Schools view that, most will say neutrally. Some even admire the persistence as long as you've, you're going to need, if you reapply, by the way, to have very tangible and clear progression points, improved scores, improved leadership, maybe a promotion, really a series we'd want of those, a multi-pronged improvement to convey to the school the following year. But that first app is still, they still see it. And it can complicate things on the recommender side a little bit. Columbia, if you're a reapplicant, you don't even redo the app. You usually just do one essay, like one additional essay. So don't rush. Like if you really like a school, you're only going to do 1 or 2 schools this year. Don't put forth some weak app. Apply when you think, whether that's round 2 right now, round 1 of next year. Choose between those rounds based primarily on when your application will be strongest. How many schools should I apply to? Well, here in this case, we were thinking originally a few months ago, how many overall? Should I divide them between rounds? How should I divide these up? Well, really right now, I think you're thinking about round 2, how many? If you're focused on round 2, how many schools can I reasonably get done between now and early Jan? If you're starting from scratch and haven't taken the GMAT yet, I think, again, honest reflection, you'll need to have and should have honest reflection with yourself, maybe some dialogue with people who know about this stuff, about whether you really should even be considering round 2. Again, that's if you haven't taken the exam and haven't really mobilized on your apps yet. If you've made pretty good progress on one or both of those, then I think you have to say to yourself, how many apps can I reasonably complete in this amount of time? I wish I could give you a number, but it is so dependent on how far along you are, and in either of those processes, how far along your recommenders are, what your work schedule is like the last 2 months of the year. I think it's a pretty, like, if you want to apply to 4 or 5, 6 schools in round 2 though, and you're maybe haven't really started the apps and are pretty early on the GMAT, I think you gotta get going. You got to get going. You probably want to get that GMAT done pretty soon. Hopefully you get the score you want or need, and then you'll have a sprint, and it'll be a real busy sprint. Again, this is all kind of presupposing. Some people out there, you might talk to people or hear people say, well, I did like 6, 7, 8 apps and it only took me 2 months. I talk about things here through the lens of doing it the right way, doing it the full way, giving yourself the best chance to get in, going the full distance and depth, reviews, iterations, essay development, resume development, meeting with your recommenders to talk them through the questions, and managing that process as well. Full level of school research and engagement, school networking, webinars, class visits, talking to them. There's a lot of work streams here for you. I usually say it's kind of a planning phase, and then 4 work streams: resume, essays, recommendations, and school research and engagement. If you have the GMAT on top of that, again, that's another work stream, and life and your job are still other work streams as well. So yeah, we calibrate that. Maybe we could tease that out a little bit through some cases through some of the questions. So that's kind of a 30-minute walkthrough of key points. Don't mean for that to sound, I know some of my points in there might sound sort of daunting. I don't mean to scare people or make you feel like, gee, I have this big plate of things I was hoping to accomplish. I'm studying for the GMAT and I really, really want to apply to MBA programs this year. I don't mean to scare you about what that looks like, but I think there is a certain reality to what the next 8 or 9 weeks of your life are probably going to look like if you want to go that route, and what it takes to put forth a high quality application. It takes time, iteration, reviews. You could even just look around, whether it's Avanti Prep or anybody else. Look at what comprehensive packages look like. Your resume is going through, I would say, just to give ourselves a little flag, many iterations, resumes, essays, each essay. Yes, the apps get a little bit, you could build on what you've done for earlier ones as you get through it, but really I don't think you don't often hit. You probably need to have like 3 or 4 apps under your belt, 2 or 3 apps. It depends on the similarity of the essays between the schools you're applying to. I don't think you start hitting gaining major efficiencies on having stories and essays already built until you're probably past 2, 3, 4 apps. Again, depends a lot on essay similarity between schools, but even then, you have to customize essays tremendously for each program, at least school-specific essays, of course. So let's see if there's anything else on here. How to approach your recommenders. Let's pause on that for a second, and then let's just go into the Q&A. We're about 30 minutes into this. Decent amount of questions. So, okay, I'm going to go from the top. From Shantanu, toward the beginning of the presentation, I'm planning to give my GMAT in mid-December, and we'll focus on my applications after that. Am I late for round 2 applications? So this is I think a perfect example, and these kind of questions will help bring to life some of the generalizations or general comments I've been making. I do think, Shantanu, unfortunately, if you're not taking the GMAT until mid-December, that is too late to start your applications. If that is the situation you're in, or if that's the situation anyone's in, where their GMAT is in mid-December, you need to be running parallel processes right now. You need to have probably something like 50-50. You need to be should be paying as much attention to your applications. I know that's really hard because you oftentimes, especially from very crowded and competitive application pools, people need a certain GMAT score even to kind of get a fair look from the admissions committee. The GMAT, by the way, it is one part of all schools will say their applications evaluations are holistic. That is true, meaning it looks across the totality of your experiences, where you went to undergrad, what you studied, what you did there, what your GPA was. Do you have any other degrees? Your personal story, your professional story, how clearly you articulate your goals, your where you've worked, what roles you've had, professional advancement, promotions, your recommenders, the quality of those, again, the personal story that you tell, the leadership and involvement that you have, how clearly you articulate your goals and why MBA and why that school, if they ask those essays or if you do so in an interview. The GMAT is part of that. It's part of that holistic evaluation, but it is also, and I feel like this is probably under-communicated, but a reality, certainly if you're applying from overrepresented applicant pools, the GMAT is also can be a barrier to entry. So it's part of that holistic process, but it's only really part of that holistic process after, not in all cases, but in many cases, after you clear that initial hurdle. So look at, by initial hurdle, I mean, there's no hard number on it, but there's a ton of data out there. GMAT Club has some studies, particularly as it might relate to applicants from India, but they have it for US applicants as well. Studies of over 5,000 applicants, pretty big sample sizes, looking at admit rates by GMAT score. And you'll see them fall off a cliff under a certain level, depending on the ranking of the school. You'll see them actually double as you go up the GMAT, from score to score to score. There was a school ranked in the top kind of like 10 to 14 range of the US rankings that a couple of years ago circulated its middle 80% GMAT range for the Indian students in its class. And that range was 730 to 780. And that's a school in the 10 to 15, 10 to 14 range of the US rankings. It's not an M7 or a top 10 school. You could probably deduce that those would be even higher. So for any applicant out there, no matter where you are, look at school GMAT data, look at averages, but probably more importantly, middle 80% ranges. By the way, high to low ranges, some schools post them. Lowest score in the class, highest score in the class, doesn't tell you much. The middle 80% ranges for schools that post that, 10th percentile to 90th percentile, that's a more telling figure. But you do also have to calibrate it for your kind of who you're up against and where you're coming from and that sort of thing. It's just the reality of the system, rightly or wrongly. But yeah, look at those. So taking it back to Shantanu's question, yeah, it's hard because you probably need to hit a certain GMAT score to have a competitive chance. But so you have to pour as much time, effort, and attention into the GMAT as you can in order to maximize that score. But you really can't wait. I don't see how somebody could wait until December 15th to start round 2 applications. I'm sure there are going to be exceptions to this. People who have a tremendous essay writing skill set, things like that, or if you've already done tons of school research, you've already picked your schools, you've already reached out, you already have your recommenders mobilized, and you've met with them, and you've prepped them, given them 1 or 2, which schools encourage, by the way. Meet with your recommenders, explain this process to them, explain the questions that they're going to talk through your experiences. Obviously, the recommenders should be the one who ultimately write the recommendations, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be out in front of that and even kind of clarifying that process for them, meeting with them. People provide, oftentimes, we call it recommendation strategy, a 1 or 2 or 3 page tear sheet or summary sheet or highlight reel for your recommenders, in addition to all of the essays, all of the resume work, all of the school research and engagement. So long answer to a short question, but I think that in simplest terms, take full force on the GMAT until December 15th, and then just kind of waking up and doing applications, probably a non-starter. I think in that case, a lot of times, by the way, people take the GMAT several times. So I think, Shantanu, if you didn't get your score that you were hoping for on that GMAT take in mid-December, you're probably looking at round 1 applications of next year, which really isn't all that bad. You get to take a breath. You get to not have this huge stressor hanging over you over these next 8 weeks. And while you take the GMAT, you get to take the GMAT probably a couple more times. And you get to be one of these people who apply in round 1 or possibly even early, who have been essentially mobilizing on this since like the spring. That's a full and complete process. So things to think about. I'm sure similar questions will come up. From Sagar, thank you for this informative monologue. It is a monologue, I know, that's kind of weird, but what we're doing now is hopefully a little bit more in the way of Q&A. I'm scoring 730 to 40 to 740 now on my, I guess on your prep or mock tests. I want to increase, or maybe on your real tests even. I want to get to 760 plus. Most probably I'll give it again in December for round 2. Am I planning all right? I think, Sagar, similar takeaways here as we just addressed the previous question. That I think it's okay if you feel like you have another 20 points up your sleeve legitimately, and you have a decent probability. Every applicant, as you consider retaking the GMAT, you have to weigh these things. Because time toward that is time not spent on your apps. So it is super applicant specific. You have to think, again, what applicant pool am I in? What kind of scores are competitive there? I think it's Sagar, if you're looking at higher ranked schools, there is a meaningful bump from 730, 740 to 760. You go from kind of a fringy score. Again, I'll cite that 730 to 780, middle 80% range. Circulated by a school in the U.S. program ranked like in the 10 to 15 range, you'd be going from a 10th-ish percentile score calibrated to your applicant pool, if you will, with a 730 to a 760 would be an above average score for or roughly average score for your applicant pool if you were looking like a US top 15, 10 to 15 range. 730 to 780, the midpoint of that is 755. So a 760 we could deduce is roughly around that midpoint. That's a huge difference to go from 10th. I know it sounds crazy, right? 20 points on the GMAT. And we've all taken the GMAT, and it's like finicky and weird. And some of the critiques you'll read out in the MBA stratosphere are that is it, how great of a test is it if the same person taking it consistently can fluctuate a decent bit? I think those are our fair critiques. A lot of schools I think are agreeing with that in starting to move away from tests. I don't know that there's a better solution, but like let's see where that goes. Back to Sagar's question. So yeah, I think if you think you have those points up your sleeve, If you think there's a decent, it's kind of an expected value calculation that you're making for yourself. What's the probability of me actually getting to that 760, and therefore how worth it is it for me to spend time preparing to try to get there and not allocating that time towards schools? I think if you feel like you have a 760 in your grasp and you could get there, it probably is worth trying again. But you will have to be able to do that while also doing your apps and doing them now, so you'll have to be able to juggle. What I don't think, taking it back to the first question, is that you'd be able to just focus on the GMAT, retake it in mid-December, and then focus on your apps. That's probably an impossibility. Again, exceptions always to that, but I think those exceptions are going to be people who have already mobilized pretty well on things and probably feel like they have a high degree of capability in getting really good essays done. But there's some things here you can't rush, but you can't wake up on December 16th and say, now I'm going to start attending events and virtual classes and talking to different people in different clubs at the schools I'm interested in, because you're not going to be able to reach them between December 15th and when you apply. So that stuff, again, should be happening now. Now, I know that this is hard too, Cigar and others out there. Sometimes 20 points on the GMAT can influence where you even apply. Again, as crazy as that sounds, it's only 20 points. It can influence where you apply, or at least some of the marginal decisions. Am I going to go for like that reachier school? Well, I probably should have a 760 if I do that, versus another one that's more target or safer. So maybe you leave that if there is one or two schools that you're deciding between like that. Maybe those you could leave. But really, if there's a certain pool of schools that you want to apply to, you should be running that process right now in parallel with trying to retake the GMAT. And to reiterate for everybody, retaking the GMAT, it's really situation and candidate specific. How competitive am I with my current GMAT score? Be honest and do your homework about that, please. We get a lot of free consultations signups, and we're talking to people who I feel like they didn't even do, make that first search on Google. There's a lot of information, right? Takes 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes to identify. Look at class profile pages. Look at studies, if they exist, about your applicant pool's performance. How to adjust GMAT figures based on that. There's some pretty big studies out there about what jobs or schools, undergraduate universities, people at certain MBA programs come from. And this is not to say like you can't buck a trend or you shouldn't try, but there's a certain pool or baseline of information that you can look at, analyze, hear about in order to inform your school strategy. So those kind of things and decisions about, well, do I need those extra 20 points on the GMAT? They become very personal and candidate specific and applicant pool specific. And again, you got to factor in that expected value calculation. Do I actually think I have a chance? And what chance do I think I have of boosting my score by 20 points? We have a question here. I don't think that's actually a question. Somebody posted more of a profile. I'm just looking for questions to see what would be kind of relevant to the topic at hand today and valuable for everybody out there. A question about a gap. This person's gap was 3 years due to a health issue. Any kind of employment gap. Many schools will have a question. For some schools, they'll ask it as a one-off. So this isn't related necessarily to rounds. We'll try to take it back there in a second, but just as a potentially helpful comment, both for this individual as well as others out there who might find themselves in similar situations. Most schools will have either a specific question, like a text box in the application, or in their optional essay. They'll say, if you've had an employment gap of greater than 3 months, please explain that. For some people, it might have been you were in between jobs or laid off, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you took a little extra time between jobs. This stuff happens. It's life. Don't be afraid of that. I think the important thing is to clarify why and what happened, and equally important, what did you do during that time? How did you spend that time? Were you actively recruiting? Were you upskilling in other ways? Did you pursue some sort of certification or certificate or credentials, or take some online classes? There could be even a few buckets to this how did you make the most of that time? I think in this individual's case, coming, when it's a health issue, I think schools are going to be very understanding of that. That's not something that's unfortunate, that folks out there have to deal with that. Some of us have to deal with that from time to time. But that's your life and your truth. So share that, explain that. Schools will, if there truly was a health issue serious enough to keep you out of work for 3 years, please do share that. And I think I know it can be a sensitive topic sometimes, but don't be afraid of sharing that. I think you want to clarify for the admissions committee what was going on, and why you therefore couldn't work. If you happen to be healthy enough to do some of those other things that I was mentioning, like upskill in any ways, you can share those. I think totally understood, though, if the health issue was serious enough that you couldn't. But again, I think each so there are folks out there who took a quick pause from their career to become a parent. So if you were had to leave work or take time off of work to raise your child for a couple of years, share that as well. I think that candor and the decision making that went into it, and again, some of the things you might have been tangentially involved in, maybe you still, I don't know, work 10 hours or contribute or advise a startup or whatever the case may be. I think share these truths, explain them. They're a little different, of course, if it's a layoff versus parental leave versus a health issue. But I think share those and share how you spent the time. And if it was something that even kind of changed your outlook on things or motivated you, as a health, if this individual worked in nonprofit and had a health, if the health issue is somehow now, hopefully you're healthy and ready to pursue the MBA and take your next steps forward in your career. If the health issue is something that is informing your career goals or your values or your worldview, it could be not just an explanation in that area of the application. It could also be a part of your story, part of an essay, part of what shaped you and your values. I don't know that you'd want it to show up in like every single, we want to see other sides of you as well, but where appropriate, you can strategize around, how these things are part of who you are. But I think anybody out there with an employment gap, you should clarify it. Usually the cutoff for a lot of schools is 3 months or greater. It's either going to be in a text box or in like an optional essay or additional information section. Another individual out there has asked how to improve my CGPA to a university's requirement if I'd like to apply next year round one. My current GMAT score is 730. Any suggestions? So it sounds like this individual, this applicant, has a GPA from their undergrad, from their bachelor's degree, that's not as high maybe as they hoped it would be, and not as high as the school that they're applying to, the MBA program that they're applying to, would hope it to be. So a little less related to round two, although something to think about, I guess, even in round two. For anyone, any applicant at any time who has subpar performance or lesser performance than they would have hoped for in undergrad, that could be overall or even in certain classes, it's worth thinking about. First, you kind of have to diagnose how significant, how significantly below target is it? Is it just in a couple of classes? Was it just a certain semester? Was it in like, I don't know, maybe you were like a physics major. and you didn't do well in those, and then you ended up switching to become like a business major and you did fine there. There are going to be instances where it's kind of micro enough or off to the side enough where you might not be able to might not need to take any real action on it. Maybe acknowledge it in an optional essay, explain, I was a physics major and, it wasn't clicking. I underperformed. I ended up realizing my passion was in business. I switched, and, over the next 3 years of my undergraduate experience, while I was a business major, my GPA was really, really strong. That could be an explanation that you provide in an optional essay. And also, by the way, if you have other elements of your, if you have the CFA, the CPA, chartered accountant, work in a really quantitative field at work, these are things that you could also point to as indications of your abilities, even if you have some of this underperformance. Now, if the underperformance was significant enough, or was in courses that are kind of more central to the evaluation by the school, calculus, statistics, core business classes, if you did not do well in these, then you probably want to think about what people will refer to commonly as building an alternate transcript. And you do that by essentially retaking credentialed university level versions of these courses and getting as high of a grade as possible in them. If you really like flunked calculus, flunked statistics, or have significant underperformance, I think you'd want to build as much of a single course bench of this as possible. So you'll hear people sometimes talk about things like MBA math. Like, there's a whole spectrum out there of everything from like survey level courses like an MBA math. It's a little more targeted. Some schools, it does have relationships with certain schools. There's probably a little bit of value there, but it's not as robust as if you were saying, yeah, my GPA in undergrad was just not that good. And or I didn't do well in calculus, statistics, core business classes, I would retake those and try to get A's in them and retake them. Look for credentialed, either in person, or if, COVID is still limiting that, it could be online. There are a variety of different providers out there. UC Berkeley Extension is one that comes to mind, UCLA Extension, a variety of providers out there. But I think in that case, you might even want to look at single discrete courses to address or rectify or correct what didn't go well for you in undergrad. And there's plenty of options in between that you'll hear people talk about. HBX, Certificate of Readiness, is a big one that people commonly toss around now. It's not as discrete as those. It's still kind of like a packaged program. It's not as discrete as these single courses that I've mentioned. I think that if you really, again, have significant underperformance in undergrad and or poor performance in single classes that are going to be scrutinized by the admissions committee, you might want to essentially retake those courses, get A's in them. Now that takes time. That's something that works for this person asking the question because they're thinking about applying in round 1 of next year. If you're thinking about that now and you're a round 2 applicant, that's hard. Maybe if you've taken the GMAT, you focus on your apps, maybe you could sign up for like a course or an HBX Core E or something that starts right after, starts in January, and tell the admissions committee that you've already signed, tell in the app, in the optional essay, if you're a round 2 applicant, tell them you have signed up for it and are going to be taking that, and acknowledged your underperformance and or weakness and or lack of quant or business courses. Acknowledge that, show self-awareness, and then be ready to act on it. If you're a round 2 applicant, you really don't have much time to do that now, certainly not the full course versions. So if that is you, if you have weak quant on your GMAT or GRE, lack of quant in undergrad or on your job, or poor quant/business courses, you had never taken business courses. These are things to consider, and it's going to be hard to do now, but it could be something you'd maybe sign up for to start right after you submit your apps. And in that case, if you've actually signed up for it, you'd want to tell the AdCom that you've done that. Even if you have like a receipt or a validation that you've signed up for it, you could include that in one of the PDFs that you upload, like in the academic section of the application. Similar with the GMAT GRE, by the way, we've talked a lot about how it's hard to juggle. It's a little tough, but you like LBS actually asks in their application, do you plan to retake the GMAT? Do you plan to retake the GMAT, and would you be willing to? If we two separate questions, would you be willing to if we wanted you to? So there are people out there. I think ideally you have your ideal GMAT score or desired GMAT score or necessary GMAT score when you apply. But some people sometimes gamble and say, you know what, I'm retaking the GMAT right after, uh, right like a week after I submit my applications. Well, you could let the school know you plan to do that. And then immediately, as soon as you get your score, hopefully it went up, update them with that score. Question here about everyone talks about reaching out to students for your applications. What questions should we ask? What else do we need to talk about? School research and engagement. I've said it tons of times throughout the conversation today. Very important. Some people call it networking. I call it school research and engagement. I consider it to be one of the pillars of the application process, right there next to resume, essays, and recommendations. By the way, preceding all of that, of course, is like school selection. You got to take the GMAT or GRE, school selection, story development, essay break. There's a lot of kind of strategizing that occurs and storyboarding that occurs before you even get into these pillars of application execution. But application execution, resume, essays, recommendations, school research and engagement, I think you'll get to a point where you feel like everything you're doing, once you've picked your schools, once you've storyboarded, where probably everything you're doing falls into those 4 categories, and then hopefully you get invited to interview, and you'll have interview prep after that. But school research and engagement, who do you reach out to? What kind of questions do you ask? I think let's think in 2 categories. The first would be, well, let's just go to any school's website and look at their events page. They're going to have information sessions, coffee chats. They'll have themed events related to a certain industry or women in business or whatever the case, a certain topic. They'll have virtual class visits oftentimes. Look around those and sign up for some mix of them and things that are of interest to you. So that's events. Secondly is direct outreach or conversation with current students or alumni. Some people work alongside former students or alums from these schools. Well, those are warm connections. You might have friends who attend them. Those are warm connections. Other people don't. But in all cases, you're able to reach out. And what you want to do is look at schools have things called student ambassadors, student region representatives. Some are even inviting of contact directly with admission, like different kind of admissions office hours and things like that. So those wouldn't be students and alumni, that would be admissions. But there are many avenues through which you can reach out to students. Clubs are another big way. What you'd want to do there is think about what clubs would I be interested in? Am I interested in pivoting into a certain industry? Technology, consulting, finance, banking. If so, I should reach out to that club and talk to a member of that club. Most of the clubs have apparatuses for this. Like they'll have a VP of outreach or a VP of external affairs who handles these conversations. If you are a member of a certain social group, geographic group, affinity group, if you have a certain other interest, reach out to an individual from those clubs as well. I think sometimes, like if you're looking for a starting point or a starting number, maybe it's talking to 3 students per school that you're applying to, in addition to the events that you attend. One maybe from a professional club, one maybe from like a personal or social or affinity group, another maybe geographic. You could kind of divide them up a little bit like that. Keep your outreach professional, courteous, concise, and respectful of their time. Don't write a book about like who you are and your background. These are like 4 sentences. It's something when we work with applicants, we actually share outreach templates with them that they can personalize, just because different countries, the networking process and the networking vibe varies. But I think in these cases, most of these cases, if you're reaching out to student ambassadors, region representatives, or club members, it's like a sentence or 2 of background about you, and then a polite or professional, why you're interested and who you'd hope to chat with. are they open to, they prefer questions via email, or are they open to a 15 to 30-minute phone conversation? Again, be respectful, write thank you notes after you do this, things like that. Questions you could ask, I mean, that really does vary. It's your opportunity to hear about the school. I think that's going to be, those questions are going to be specific to who you're talking to. If it's a person from a professional club that you're interested in, ask about recruiting. Like, what companies, you've read about things on there. You've read their employment report already, the school's employment. Do your homework already. Show up to these conversations educated and informed. I think it can be a turnoff. And these are some schools even kind of route. Some schools even do a little bit of filtering through their clubs, admissions filtering through their clubs. If you turn somebody off, or you're rude, or you're just like so uninformed, it can make its way back. And on the contrary, if you make a good impression, that stuff can bubble up. It's either karma, or it's like some cases more explicit than karma. So yeah, read employment reports first. Gather as much information as you can. If you're talking to a certain professional club officer, understand. I'm looking to go into technology or finance or consulting, whatever the case may be, from a certain school. Inform yourself first, but then ask more specific questions about the recruiting process. How do most students who are interested in that industry get their job at that school? Is it through on-campus recruiting? Is it through their own devices? Is it through networking with alumni? Which companies recruit there? For which teams and which offices and which roles? These are all things that should actually end up in your goals essays, by the way, this level of specificity. You don't want to just say, I want to go into technology. Technology is enormous. What type of technology? What offices? What companies? What roles? What teams? You want to validate through these conversations, or at least develop specificity around who actually recruits at these schools. You would probably not want in your, if you have the ability to cite examples of companies that you'd be interested in recruiting for, validate whether they actually recruit at the school. It's going to vary a little bit from school to school and program to program. I would also say that if you are from a country outside the one that you're hoping to do your MBA in, it might make sense to connect with another international student, whether in the professional club or elsewhere, to gain an understanding, probably even in the professional club that you're interested in, to understand the recruiting dynamics for international students for that industry. Which companies sponsor international students for visas and which don't. That's granularity that's going to be important to you as well. Beyond that, things about, the values of the school, the culture, the community, what makes it stand out to them. You research schools, you're going to come up with all these different questions. What was like the most transformative experience they've had, how they've developed as a person or a leader, how they've stepped outside their comfort zone, how they would characterize, again, show that you're familiar with this stuff already, but then ask more specific questions about them. Get to know the school, the culture, the community, the values, the resources that are relevant to your interests. There's a whole host of questions you could ask, and keep your questions targeted and reasonable in a set of time. Unless you got a really, really generous person you were speaking with, I mean, maybe it's a 30-minute phone conversation, something like that. I don't think you should go in there with like 16 questions and think you're going to talk to them for an hour or hour and a half. I think, you have a one-on-one conversation, be respectful of their time. They're having many of these. Have a small handful of informed questions, and then spread. If you have other questions, maybe the professional club person, you talk more about the professional stuff. And then when you talk to somebody else, you talk more about the culture, the community, the values, other resources. Let's see here if we got maybe one or two more questions that are relevant to the topic at hand. Probably one more question that's group relevant here. We do have somebody asking if I had a 70%. Let's do 2 more questions. Three more questions. One is a pretty direct question. Should we convert our GPA from WES? That's one of the providers that does take international transcripts and convert them to like US style GPAs and grading for the clarification or edification of the admissions committee. Not all schools require. So the first step here is when you engage with whatever school you're applying to, look carefully at the instructions. Go open your application, go to the education section, and see what the instructions are. Do they require? Some schools do require such a conversion through WES or one or two other providers. Others don't require that. Should we convert our GPA? In the application, again, there should be instructions here when you upload, like when there'll be a field where you put in where you went to school and what your degree was, and they'll ask you your GPA and sometimes your class rank. Usually there are the instructions, but you should look at it carefully for every school. Usually the instructions there are going to say, do not convert your GPA. Please report it in this box exactly as it appears on your transcript, blank out of blank. But if that is a school that also asks for your WES report, you're going to upload the WES report separately, and they'll see whatever the conversion is there. But for the most part, now this isn't like a total generalization, but I think it should be true most of the time. Read the instructions carefully. Does my school require a WES or similar, or WES or similar conversion? When it asks me for my GPA, it's usually going to ask you, do not convert. Put it as it appears in print on your original transcript. But then if they ask for the WES report, they're going to be able to see that when you upload it. I guess there could be, for schools that don't require the WES report, if your WES conversion is flattering or high, you could consider, it would be kind of a strategic decision. You could consider uploading it for other schools that don't even ask for it. So if you had a really attractive conversion, that's an option. You might want to say, in an optional essay, please note that although not required, I have uploaded my WES. I have obtained a WES grade conversion and have provided it here, as I believe it provides more clarity or transparency or translation of my undergraduate performance. Another quick one, and then we'll do the last question here. 70% in engineering, kind of a low GPA, but if my GMAT score is a 770, should I opt for Harvard, Stanford, Wharton? I mean, it's great to have the 770 to make up for the 70% in engineering, but so much else goes into whether it's going to be competitive for Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, where you've worked. Like, again, these are schools where there are pretty big studies out there about the type of jobs people have and the type of schools they went to before undergrad. And, there aren't many, you can't have many holes in your strategy or soft spots in your strategy if you think you're going to be competitive at one of these schools. Should I opt for the top three? Like, I think there are very, 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 very few individuals out there who should only apply to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, even if you have a 770 GMAT. I mean, the low GPA alone in a hyper-competitive applicant pool for those schools, so I don't think really it would be extremely rare for me to encounter somebody in all the free consultations that we do where they should say, yeah, only apply to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. So I think the answer there is probably going to be no. But if you have a 770 and you're applying to several schools, you're applying to 6 schools or something, could 2 of Harvard and Stanford or Wharton be in there? Maybe. It kind of depends on the rest of your profile. What you've done, where you've worked, where you went to school, your promotions, your impact, your leadership inside and outside of work, your quality of your recommendations. All 3, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, from a really challenging and crowded and competitive applicant pool, might be even an over. I don't know anything else about your profile, but that even feels probably like an over allocation to me, too top heavy. especially like if you apply to 5 schools and 3 are Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. There's a lot of data out there at, an applicant from India with a 770 GMAT score to Wharton. There's one study out there that I think reports roughly a 5 or 6% acceptance rate with a 770 GMAT. So it's going to be even lower than that at Harvard. Might be half that at Harvard and half of Harvard at Stanford. So no, I don't think it probably, depending on what the rest of your profile looks like, even just with the low GPA, only top 3, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. Really, really, really tough sledding. Almost always going to be unwise. So I would think about, if you were really tempted by applying to Harvard and Stanford, Wharton, if you're really tempted by applying to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, could 1 or 2 of those become part of your application strategy? Maybe 2 of them if you want to be aggressive, but 2 out of maybe 6 feels fair to me. Again, depends a lot on the rest of your profile. This was going to be the last question now coming. GMAT range for Indian male applicants to a top 15 or 20 US university. So let me say this. I alluded to this a little bit before. There is a school in the US top 10 to 15 that I think 2 years ago circulated a middle 80% GMAT range for the Indian students, both male and female, in their class. And that middle 80% range was 730 to 780. The midpoint of that range is a 755. The 10th percentile is 730. That's in the 10 to 15 range. That school's average GMAT is probably 20 points lower than M7 schools' average GMATs. So you could probably bet safely that the middle 80% range for Indian applicants at M7 schools is a tick higher than. There's not much higher you can really go. Maybe 740 to 780. It's hard to put an exact number on anything. GMAT is not something that's viewed in a vacuum, but as much as I hate to say it, if you're applying from a hyper-competitive applicant pool, it is both a part of the holistic evaluation as well as can be an initial barrier to entry. You do want to look at that data. There's another great study on a couple of good studies on GMAT Club I think are pretty representative. One is called the Top 50 Analysis U.S. Schools Indian Applicants. If you Google something to that effect, I could even try to find it real quick here. Top 50 Analysis. Yeah. I'm going to post this. I'm going to put it in the chat box and let's see. I'm going to put it in the private chat, and if our admin is still here, maybe it can be shared. 2 links, one quantitative, one qualitative, both from GMAT Club. Both a couple of years old, but I think still pretty relevant. You could say, hey, Greg, it's a little weird sharing. You know what? Let me share my screen. Oh, there we go. Okay, there are links. That's the quantitative analysis. It divides the analysis into 20, and the top 50. I'm actually going to pull it up. Why not? Oops. Share window. There we go. Okay. Scroll down. So MBA admission chances for Indian applicants top 50 analysis. It is not gender specific. This is a 3-year-old post, maybe even 4, but I still think it is about as big of a sample size. It's unofficial data, I should say. Unofficial data, but about as big of a sample size as you're going to find anywhere. 5,000. I mean, they do political presidential polls in the US are sometimes based on like 300 people. Here we have 5,000 in this sample size. Pretty big self-reported data on GMAT Club. This is the top 20. This looks at the top 20 schools in the US for Indian applicants, acceptance rates by GMAT score. Indian applicants with a 700 or 710 across the entirety of the top 20 programs in the US have a 2% acceptance rate. Indian applicants with a 720 or 730 across the entirety of the top 20 schools in the US have, in this study, a 5% acceptance rate. 740 or 750 are up to 11%. 760 or 770 are up to a 16%. Like the two observations I usually call out in this chart are, look at how it jumps from 700 to 710 to 720 or 730. It more than doubles, 2% to 5%. It more than doubles again, 5% to 11%, the next kind of rung when you hit 740, 750. The other thing, though, unfortunately, is those are daunting numbers. This is across the whole top 20. And if you have a 740 or 750, an 11% acceptance rate is like a 1 in 10. So it underscores how much else goes into this and how strong your applications need to be and how differentiated. This is, if Abhijit is still here as our admin, he says, this is my analysis. Great analysis. I link to it all the time, or posting under Naren. But anyway, really good analysis. By the way, for those of you out there applying from India who are, not sure this year versus next year, a little worried about, most schools, at least US schools, the average years of work experience at enrollment is 5 years. The middle 80% statistic on that is usually, and you'll find this, look at every class profile page, build a spreadsheet, look at the data. The average at US programs is usually going to be 5 years of work experience at enrollment, with a middle 80% range of 3 to 7, or sometimes 3 to 8 years. But look at this for Indian applicants. It's not expressed in work experience, it's expressed in age. Indian applicants, according to this study, do a little bit better as like slightly, maybe a little bit above average on work experience. I think you don't want it to be like too far above, but I think the theory there, and my anecdotal evidence we work with tons of applicants from India, supports this. I think because it can be so crowded and competitive, that extra promotion, that extra year or two of work experience, those extra responsibilities or impact, can make a difference. So I think if we go back up to GMAT score, so I guess the point there is, don't be afraid of like applying next year. Unless you're like really tipping pretty deep into the, if you have like 5 years of work experience now and you're going to have 6 years of work experience next year, that's not, but your GMAT is going to be 40 points higher and you're going to be able to spend 4 months on applications instead of 4 weeks. I think that becomes a no-brainer. That kind of extreme hypothetical that I just mentioned. Look at those GMAT scores. It's unfortunate almost, I would say, and could probably breed some cynicism as it relates to the application process. Oh my goodness, every school says that, applications are holistic and GMAT is just one part of it. But if you are from a really crowded and competitive applicant pool, there are initial cutoffs or barriers to entries or ranges that you at least want to keep in mind. Even if a certain school posts on their website that their overall class has a middle 80% range of a 690 to 760, we see from some of these varying points and varying sources that the middle 80% range for the Indian applicants at school are 730 to 780, not 690 to 760. We see in other studies online that an Indian applicant with a certain GMAT score has by some estimates 1/4 to 1/5 the acceptance rate at a given GMAT score as a non-Indian applicant with that same GMAT score. I'm not saying this stuff is right or fair. Doesn't sound very fair, but I guess you could say it's supply and demand. You have tons of very talented applicants with great scores chasing relatively few spots in a class. A lot of US MBA programs are about 1/3 international. And that 1/3 international is divided across many different countries. So you can do the math on like how many people are competing for a certain number of seats. The schools are building classes that are representative of various groups within personal and professional groups within the U.S. population as well as the global population. So you definitely want to differentiate yourself. You got to kind of clear that score. Hopefully you can get into that 730 to 780 range that we saw, and really I think 730 is the thin part of that range to be on. You're still only like a 10th percentile within that group. And you can look at some of the numbers here as well. 740, 750 GMAT, great score, amazing score. You should feel proud of. 11% acceptance rate across the whole of the US top 20. It's going to be lower, of course, the further up in the top 10, the harder half of that half that you get into. All right, I think we should leave it there. There are other resources. There's a great qualitative guide. I linked to it as well in the private chat. If our admin wants to share that link as well, it's what's called the Indian Male MBA Application Guide. It's also from I believe it's from a Ross alum who was one of the GMAT club moderators a couple of years ago. It's a well bookmarked, a lot of kudos on there. It's one person's take on things. It's qualitative. It's, I don't agree with totally everything in it, but it's a pretty indicative analysis as well. So you could Google Indian Male MBA Application Guide at GMAT Club. You'll probably find it there if it doesn't get linked. But sorry to take that tangent there toward the end, specific to one group of applicants, but I think we have a lot of applicants from India on this call today. So hopefully that was helpful. Last little questions here. I know we're coming up on, but hey, the Q&A is fun. I think we're going to do another Q&A, by the way. Let me pull up that's really actually supposed to be just an open Q&A. December 2nd at the same time as today, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time in the US. Thursday, December 2nd, I'm going to do an open Q&A so we could have another kind of conversation like this just as we wrap up here. I guess sorry to keep going and going. Hopefully it's helpful. We have a question from Tim out there in the crowd. Is applying to round 3 extremely difficult because I think I can bring a much stronger application forth by then? Do admissions usually ask for a justification? And then we have another one from Tim. I think some of these people probably missed the beginning of the call. I don't know. Round 3 is really hard. I think I joked before that you'll hear people call it like the astronaut and Olympian round. But if you are above, like strongly, like a really strong applicant for a given school, probably means by round 3 that you're above muster. Your GMAT score is higher than that school is used to. Your GMAT score is higher than that school is used to, higher than averages. You're kind of a plus candidate on a series of metrics. Then I think you could go for it in round 3 with a certain school. You probably still want to explain why in round 3 if there's like a legitimate reason. I think if it's a school where you're just kind of in the mix and like regularly would be sort of competitive but not sure, to apply to what I would call a target school in round 3, I think is going to be hard because there's going to be tons of yous out there who already applied in round 1 and round 2. So like, why do they need? I think it would almost be more like a safe school. Your score is 40 points above the average for that school, and you've got great experiences and great everything. And okay, yeah, they're going to still have a reason to look at me in round 3. I think if it's a school where you would just be regular old competitive, but like, it's in my range, but it's going to be hard, that's going to be tough in round 3. Maybe your reason is really good. I don't know, but I think when you're getting in that territory, you maybe want to start thinking about like applying in round 3, you just wait like a few more months. You can apply in round 1 and have all the benefits that comes with that in terms of admission and being front of the pack and maybe even scholarships. So let's leave it there. I hope that was helpful. I hope to see everybody again on Thursday, December 2nd. Same time, same place. Thank you for your time. We'll do more of an open Q&A that whole time then. And good luck with your applications. If you are interested in more formal advice, resume reviews, essay reviews, story development, essay brainstorming, you can sign up for a free consultation there. There's the link to the website, avantiprep.com. You'll see a tab to sign up for free consultations. We offer a variety of services. I rattled off a few of them just now, but again, school selection, story development, career goal development, essay brainstorming, recommender selection, recommendation strategy, i.e. how do you prep your recommenders? What themes or examples should they talk about? Didn't go into tons of detail on it today, but be out in front with your recommenders. They have a deadline also. You can't leave it, for the last minute with them. Resume reviews, essay reviews, interview prep, waitlist support, scholarship negotiations are all under the purview of ways we engage with applicants. I think that, if you are facing some tight deadlines and many deadlines coming up, having extra sets of eyes and feedback like that can significantly enhance and formalize a lot of the feedback that we formalize, expedite, enhance. So feel free to sign up for a free consultation if you're interested in the possibility of working together. Hope you enjoyed the call. Look forward to next time. See you on Thursday, December 2nd. Have a great day.